Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Data Standard Audio Experience. Today on our show, we have Ben Garney, the CEO and founder of the Engine Company. And today we're speaking about social gaming. So welcome to the show, Ben. I'm very excited to have you today.
Thank you. It's great to be on.
Yeah, and could you tell the audience more about your background and just go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Ben Garney. I'm a serial entrepreneur in the gaming space primarily. So I started out at a company called Garage Games doing game engine technology. So I was first hired there, led the big chunk of the engine development over the years. I was there about 5 years. We had an exit to IAC. And not too long after that, I went on to co-found a company called Push Button Labs in the social gaming space. So I went from sort of like traditional gaming to social gaming. And so we were in kind of that first wave of, Zynga and Playdom and, like post Farmville. So like not Mafia Wars, but a little after. And so we ended up building a title called Social City. It got a Game of the Year award in 2010. And so we pushed about 3.5 million daily players. That was a great learning experience. Everybody in the space was kind of figuring it out. And that was, I think, really the first wave in games that was like heavily, data science driven. And we would joke that they had a room full of PhDs that they would like shove all the data into. And then, when it looked like they were making money, they had, a significant war chest of investor cash, and they would just go buy ads and like pump it through and then, double their money or whatever. So we ended up starting an exit with Playdom and finishing that exit with Disney because Disney acquired Playdom. Along the way, got the opportunity to connect with a bunch of people in the tech and web and gaming space, which was fantastic. And then after that, I went and I founded the Engine Company. So sort of, key hire to co-founder to founder. And so we built a framework for interactive apps and games that I sold off to an instant gaming company a few years later. And then it also became, I got married and had kids, and it became a little bit of a lifestyle consulting business. So as part of that, I've done, I just finished a game for Apple Arcade called Marble It Up. It's the best marble rolling platformer in the world. Go try it, check it out. I've also done work as a fractional CTO and VP engineering for a number of companies, including the instant game company I mentioned, AR, VR, embedded systems, network printing technology, streaming video, just all kinds of, one weird specialty has led to the next as I've gone through my career. So I've been very fortunate to get to do a wide variety of interesting things over the years. And, a lot of them are data driven. And so it's cool to have the chance to talk about that side of it.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to hear more about everything that you're working on currently. And it's very clear that you're passionate about the gaming industry and being able to do analytics with it and data, since you've brought a lot of your past experience over to your current company today at the Engine Company. So I'm excited to dive deeper into this. And today the big topic is revolving around social gaming. So could you tell us how would you define what social gaming is in your own words, and what does it really entail?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting genre. It started out being social gaming because it all happened on social platforms, so primarily Facebook. So you would have, Farmville's the best example, at least if you're, I guess, over a certain age, then you know about it. But the really innovative thing is that you could go into people's social networks and start saying, hey, come engage with this game. So, I want to build a barn. You would post this on your Facebook feed, and you would get people to click on it. And if 50 people clicked on it, then your barn would appear in the game. And so you would use, mechanics like this to start driving people into the game. And then you would do, heavy data modeling. And, now you can kind of buy this off the shelf, but at the time it was, very cutting edge stuff. And you can say, okay, this is the retention, this is lifetime value, this is the number of people they're going to bring in and the value of those people. And so you could really start building out a clear financial picture. And so it was kind of the first wave of gaming outside of like casino gaming that was, very heavily motivated by that. So you'd see these game design decisions driven by data. You'd see tweaking to the game and continuous updates to the game based on, what makes it the most profitable. And And so that's kind of evolved over the years into instant gaming, where you see stuff like in Facebook Messenger that is doing a very similar playbook. It's just like more group and one-on-one and a little less feed-based. And so it's an interesting field because you have a lot of tension between creative and metric-driven sides of it.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of different moving parts to the work that you're doing right now. And specifically with data that you're working with, how are you using data to analyze and improve social gaming right now?
Yeah, the biggest thing is that you're always looking at your user pipeline and how they monetize, right? And monetization can come from a couple different angles. Primarily, it's sort of threefold. It's getting more people into the game, advertising, and in-game purchases of different kinds. So it could be a power-up, it could be some cool unit that is advantageous in the game. It could just be a status symbol. So like in Social City, you're building this little city, and you could go out, and so we actually had like all the buildings from the Disney theme parks, and so you could go and like spend some money, and it's a couple of bucks a building, and then all of a sudden you can build out your own little mini theme park inside of your city. And so that was very, very popular and very cool, and it was a neat intersection of it had a a clear connection to the metrics. It was an interesting and creative piece of the game, and it tied us into this sort of larger IP picture that would get people excited about the title. And so you're always kind of looking for stuff like that where you hit that sweet spot of all three things. So the interesting parts of that are hooking up events in the right places, structuring the game so that you have a good balance of those pieces, but it's also measurable. And then figuring out how to kind of build and scale it in a profitable way, because it turns out profitable games are more fun to work on than ones that are losing money.
Yeah, and with a lot of the work that you're doing with revolving around data and a lot of the games that you're creating with your team, I'm sure there's a lot of challenges that come with everything that you're working on. So what do you think has been the biggest challenge that either yourself or your team has had to encounter?
Yeah, so games are just a continuous set of challenges. So the first challenge is always making something that's engaging for players and, getting that initial traction. And so, in social games and instant games, usually you'll look at stuff that's successful, you'll find a playbook from one of those titles, and then you'll adapt it to a specific project that you have in mind. So, for instance, there might be a game that's doing well that's about fishing, and you might say, okay, well, we think we can do a great game about car racing, and so but we can take a lot of the pieces from this other game and build something successful out of that. So you put these things together, and then you go out there, and then the next challenge you face is, does it work in a small scale test? So you'll go out, like the Philippines are a popular market for this, but there are others. And you'll do some small scale advertising and some limited engagement and get 10,000 people to go through the game or something, and start measuring, is it up to snuff on metrics? You get see the retention you want. Are people, maybe you don't have monetization hooked up in the game yet, but are people clicking to the store and looking at that side of it? And then you'll tweak and adjust, and a lot of games crash on the rocks there and don't make it because it, for whatever reason, it's not done well, or it just doesn't speak to people, or who knows what. But if you can make it past that challenge, then you get into, how do we scale the game so that it can, run with millions of people at the same time? How do we make sure that the game is balanced so that you can't just go out and harvest the same gem over and over and get infinite money, and a bunch of stuff in that vein. And so then you kind of get to that, the prime of the game. And then the challenge is, typically what you see is the game will shoot up, and then it's sort of this gradual decline. And so then the challenge is, how do you stretch that decline out as far as possible so that it kind of remains a worthwhile game to run for, hopefully years and years. So those are kind of like the life cycle challenges. And then really the biggest challenge is translating, you're getting these metrics, hopefully you're measuring the right things, and you make a change, and then understanding what drove that, because there's so many different pieces to a game. It could be that the art was cool, and if you had the same behavior but you didn't do as cool an art the second time, your metrics are bad. So you might be thinking gameplay, and it turns out you just have a great artist, or vice versa. So figuring that out can be really tricky.
Yeah, definitely. And you actually got me thinking about certain time periods of specific games. And I'm curious about your thoughts on this. So I'm sure that kids back then had different interests in different, let's say, genres of games. And that's different from the kids today of what they like to play and what they like to see with the artwork and everything. So how do you kind of think about what is going to be popular today in the current market as the time kind of changes? Are you thinking about the artwork? Are you thinking about specific genres? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that gets right to the heart of how do you build a successful game. So one of the things that was really interesting about the social game wave, the first wave, and is continuing but is less notable in current times, is a lot of the people playing those games had never played games before. So you suddenly had, you went from like 18-year-old people playing fast action games to like all of a sudden, your mom is playing Farmville and she's never played a game before, and she's getting into this thing because it's actually like somewhere she spends time and ties into people that she, actually, cares about and interacts with. And so that was a huge transition and caused no small amount of consternation amongst the kids and younger people that were playing games, because it's like, wait a minute, who are these old people showing up and playing these games? So that's continued. And so a lot of times the games that are successful, it'll be because they speak to a broader audience, or they speak to a market that's underserved. So like fishing, for instance, classical games don't have that, right? Like classically games are like blow up the thing, or like collect all the coins or something like that. But it turns out there's lots of people that fish, and if there's a fishing game that's fun and accessible, they'll go play that game. And so finding a niche like that speaks to a lot of people, but maybe isn't in the traditional path of game development, can be very profitable, and be the seed of a successful game. And then, sometimes it's just stuff that looks cool, like you said, that draws attention. And sometimes it can align socially with a group of people. So, for instance, I worked on a title that had like 90% penetration in the Philippines. And so because they speak English, they have similar tastes to, the mainstream North American audience, and they are very social. So, everybody talks to all their relatives all the time. And so you would play these games that were designed to, involve the group, and that resonated really well with the culture there. And so you saw this crazy high growth. And around that time, I even went on a cruise, and there were some Filipino people working the cruise, and they only got to talk to their family every few months, right? Like it's a hard job. And they knew about it. They're like, oh, you work on that game, that's so cool, right? So it's like even people who were like out on the social network, because it resonated, were able to connect to this game. And so it's really, it's a really broad surface area that you can target. And honestly, a lot of the things that are fun 10 years ago are still fun now. And, you update them and tweak them, and there's lessons learned. But, I found that there's sort of a threshold of fun. And once a game kind of gets past that threshold, then you could pick it up 5 years later or 10 years later and play it. And it's still, it's still a fun game. It's still interesting to interact with. So it's a weird mix of fads and these sort of timeless building blocks. Sort of like, it's like there's only 10 plots for movies or whatever. That it's like every movie is different, but like they all kind of fit into similar buckets at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a great explanation there of just thinking about the times and how the game that maybe you played 10 years ago can still be fun today. That actually brought me to think about, I think it was like an old Mario game, the NES device. It was one of I think the first games maybe, but that was super popular back then. And I think it's difficult to play it now since there's not many of the consoles now, but that's still something it seems like it's almost vintage to play, and it's still fun to play today, even though it's so simplistic. So definitely great explanation there. And my final question for you is also, how are you bridging the gap between the creative side and the analytical side for games? Because I'm sure that you, as more of a technical person, need to work closely with people on the creative side. So how are you kind of bridging this gap?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question, because I've come at it in a few different contexts. So I mentioned that game for Apple, and so that's more of a traditional. You can play it with a gamepad on your couch, or you can play it on your phone, but it's not a social game. I'm not sending invites to people to come and like roll marbles around with me or something like that. Although we do have multiplayer, but it's not a traditional social game. And we have analytics in that game, such as Apple's very privacy sensitive, so there's a lot of limitations in terms of what we can do, but we can see how far people have gotten through the game, and if there's certain levels that people hit and then they just stop playing. And so that's a little subset of what you do with like a social game, which is going to be much more measured, but it's still, you can take that information, extract everything you can out of the limited stuff you get, and then start going to the designers and the creative, more creative people on the project, and start saying, hey, this level's too hard. Why are people failing in the tutorial, even though it should be really easy? What are people's completion? How long does it take them to complete a level? Where are they falling off potentially? And so, it's kind of twofold, which is one, in gaming, always the programming side, ends up being very creative, and it's always a collaboration with these many other disciplines, which is one of the things that I love about it. So you have to be good at taking the game, identifying things that are likely to be important, identifying which ones you can measure and how, and then put that into the code and get it out there and have it be measured. And then once you've done that, then you have to go and translate that back to the pure creative side of the team. And in the case of that game, it was people that I'd worked with before who also had a free-to-play background, a social gaming background. And so we were able to, collaborate really tightly. But in other contexts, you have to, really take a lot of initiative to, sort of elicit from people what they need, crunch it through the brain, implement it, and then take it back to them. And so, that's one of the interesting challenges. Usually if in companies that specialize in these kinds of games, a lot of times the designers for the game will be, half game designer, half data scientist, where they have a good background in stats and they have a good background in modeling, and they're able to go into your analytics tools and like directly extract a bunch of information that they can use. Whereas like Mario or even this Marvel game, it's, tends to be that the designers are great at the fun parts of the game, and then they need a little help to engage with the metrics. In our case, we had a team that was able to do that because of the background, but a lot of teams that wouldn't be the case. So, like you said, it very much is bridging the gap as a technical person and getting stuff there and back again.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to say thank you so much, Ben, for joining me today on the Data Standard Show. It was so great to have you and hear more just about the video game world and all the stuff that you're working on today. Where can everyone find you online to connect with you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is a great place to find me, linkedin.com/Ben Garney. My company website is theengine.co, and then my blog, bengarney.com, and Twitter as well. So, if you are into data science and games, feel free to hit me up. And thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. It was so great to have you. And to everyone in the audience, for more information on the Data Standard, please join us at www.datastandard.io to check out more podcasts and more info on our company. Thanks so much, Ben, for joining me. So great to have you, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you.